Hello and welcome back to my chess course. In this section I will tell you how you can make your rook and your knight interact with each other when you are attacking. As the knight is a short-range piece, for it to take part in checkmating attacks, it has to be near the enemy king. While a bishop hidden away on the a1 square can check a king on the opposite side of the board, a knight must be close, at least within hoping distance. This means that for a knight to participate in checkmating attack, two likely advantages have to be in the attacker's favor. First, the defender has a vital square weakness, which the knight can occupy, or the knight is protected against capture. Just as we see in this position, the magnetic squares for knights are f3, f6 in case of kingside castling, and c3 and c6 in case of queenside castling. The most common knight and rook mate, also called the Arabian mate, it is shown in this position. White's knight has taken roost on the most attractive f6 square, and the rook has occupied the 7th rank. King goes to h8 and rook h7 is a checkmate. It is a standard finish in case if f8 square is occupied or covered by a white piece, forcing black's king into the corner. Moreover, this position features an equally important pattern for another reason: perpetual check. If black is able to play king f8, white has knight h7, king e8, knight goes back to f6, king f8, knight h7, with perpetual check and a draw. Please keep it in mind. Thank you for your attention. We will continue in the next lecture. Let's add a few pieces to the position from the previous lecture. The common pattern that experienced players will know best is automatic knight f6 check, bringing the knight to the ideal square with check, king g7, rook h7 checkmate. I want to show you one more position. This time the king is mated from the 8th rank. White starts with the ideal routine move, knight f6 check, king g7, rook h7 check, king f8, rook h8. And now black can choose his poison. If king g7, then rook g8, checkmate. If king e7, then rook e8, checkmate, thanks to the d6 pawn that blocks an escape square for the king. Please remember this mating pattern too. Thank you for your attention. Welcome back to my chess course. In this lecture I want to show you completely different form of coordination, which is also quite common. This time white's knight is denied the ideal fx square, but thanks to the blocking f8 rook and open h-file, white has the checkmating coup. Knight e7 check, king h7, and rook h3 checkmate. This pattern demonstrates that somehow the knight's control over the g6 square is key to the checkmate and easily missed. For example, I can add a black pawn at h7 and the white queen on c2, and you can use this pattern again. Knight e7 check, king goes to h8, queen takes on h7, king has to take, and rook h3 checkmate. Please always remember about this tactical pattern, it often works. Welcome back to my chess course. Look at the screen. White's winning combination in this position is obvious, right? You may pause this video and think a little bit. It's white to move, and your task is to find the best move for white. Okay, we continue. The correct answer is Rook 1 takes on d4. E takes on d4. Queen takes on h7, check. King takes queen, and Rook h5, it's a checkmate. In this lecture, I also want to demonstrate two different patterns. And it's not only about rook and knight interaction. You should use your queen in this position. In this position, we have a real classic. Black begins the checkmating pattern of rook and knight. So it's black to move. You may pause this video and think a little bit. We continue. Rook a1 check. Rook takes rook. Queen g5 check. King b1. Knight d2 check. King c1. Knight b3 check. King b1. Queen c1 check. Rook takes queen. Knight d2 check. King a2. Rook a8. Queen a4. Rook takes queen, it's a checkmate. In this position, white had a better defense by declining the queen sacrifice. King a2. And black has to take the pawn on c2. Black wins, although not as beautifully as in the actual game. For example, queen takes on b3, rook a8. Queen a3, queen c4. King b1, queen e4. King a2, queen takes on d5 check. King b1, queen takes on h1. King a2, rook takes queen, pawn takes rook, queen g2 check, and black has decisive material gains. In this position, it is also possible for white to play knight takes on c7, to take a8 square under his control. Knight takes on a1. Knight a6. Knight goes back to b3. Queen takes on b3. Queen c6. It's a double attack. The knight and the rook are hanging. Rook d1. Queen takes on a6. It's a winning endgame for black. Another option was to play queen b7. Knight c5, queen c6, rook b8, attacking on b2, rook a to b1, queen c4 check, king a1, knight b3 check, king a2, knight c1 double check, king a3, queen a2 checkmate. Thank you for your attention. From this lecture, I want you to remember this mating pattern with the rook and the knight. Welcome back to my chess course. In this lecture, I want to show you an example of this mating pattern happened in the game played by grandmasters. It was the game between Delfino Gastaldi and Angela Giusti. It was Slav defense. d4, d5, c4, c6, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, d takes on c4, a4, bishop f5. It's a classical line, knight e5, e6, f3, bishop b4, e4, bishop takes on e4, black sacrifices a piece, pawn takes bishop, knight takes pawn, bishop d2, queen takes on d4, knight takes on e4, queen takes on e4 check, queen e2, bishop takes on d2 check, king takes on d2, queen d5 check, king c2, castle, knight takes on c4, b5, knight e3, queen c5 check, king b1, knight to d7, g3. White wants to develop his bishop. Knight b6. The pawn is hanging. A takes on b5. C takes on b5. Bishop g2, attacking the rook. Rook a to b8. Rook c1, attacking the queen. Queen e5. Rook takes on a7. Knight c4. White can't take this knight because of the pin. That's why he plays rook e1. Queen d4, attacking the rook. Rook a6. Knight d2, check. King a2. Now it's black to move, and your task is to find the best move for black. You may pause this video and think a little bit. Okay, we continue. Queen b6. Inviting the continuation. Rook takes on b6, rook a8, check, bishop takes rook, rook takes bishop, check, rook a6, rook takes rook, checkmate. White of course refuses this sacrifice. He plays rook a3, b4, attacking the rook, rook a4, queen d4 with the transparent threat of b3, king a3 and queen c5 with mate to follow, king a1, rook f to c8, rook d1, b3, yet another offer of the queen to set up our rook and knight checkmating pattern. So if rook takes, then rook a8, bishop takes, and again we see the same checkmating pattern. That's why white plays rook a3, rook c2, a devastating invasion. White now resigned. b2 is hanging. A pleasing final would have been rook b1, queen takes on b2, check, rook has to take, rook c1 check, rook b1 and rook takes rook, checkmate. A fine combination that maximized our rook and knight mating motif. Thank you for your attention. We will continue in the next section. Hello and welcome back to my chess course, and today we are going to analyze the game between Eur and Averbach, which was played in Zurich in 1953. A strategic plan how to realize your advantage in the endgame is shown in this game. d4, knight f6, c4, a6, knight c3, bishop b4. It's Nimza Indian defense. e3, castle, bishop d3, d5, knight f3, c5, castle, knight c6, a3. Bishop has to take on c3. Pawn takes bishop, b6, C takes on d5, E takes on d5, knight d2. White is going to play e4, bishop e6, bishop b2, and c4. Developing bishop to b2, white induced black to play c4, what make e3, e4 breakout stronger. However, black hopes to advance his pawns on the queen side. Bishop c2, b5, f3, a5, rook e1. Maybe it was better to play e4 immediately. However, rook e1, queen b6, knight to f1, b4. If white takes on b4 with both of his pawns, then black would have a protected passed pawn on c4. Queen d2, b3. The bishop is hanging and black created protected passed pawn. However, now it is blocked by the bishop on b2. Bishop b1, and now any endgame is winning for black because of this pawn. The only task for black is to beat back white's attack in the center and on the king side and trade pieces. a4, e4, knight to e7, knight g3, king h8, rook e2, knight f to g8, knight h5. Black was preparing to play f5 and now he plays so. Black wants to trade at least a pair of bishops, and he can also join his queen to the defense on the king side. Queen g5 attacking on g7, rook f7, e takes on f5. White has to trade pawns because he needs his rook on a1 to join the battle. Bishop takes on f5, bishop takes bishop, knight takes bishop, and rook a to e1. Rook e5 attacking the pawn on d5 and preventing black to move the game into endgame was stronger. However, white played rook a to e1, queen d8. Black forces to trade queens, otherwise he will play queen h4. Queen takes queen, rook takes queen, rook e8 with knight f4 idea attacking the pawn on d5. Rook takes rook, rook takes rook, and rook e7. Rook has to take. Otherwise, black would play rook e2, winning a bishop. If bishop c1 or bishop a1, then there will be check on a1. So he has to take. Knight g to e7, king f2. Black was threatening to play knight from f5 to e3 and d1, attacking both the pawn and the bishop. King g8, g4, attacking the knight. Actually, it was necessary to build a fortress, leaving the pawn on g3 and moving the knight to d1, g4. Now black is looking for a way to attack the bishop on b2. Knight d6, king e3, knight b5, f4, knight to c8, f5, knight c to d6, knight f4, attacking on d5. White pieces are totally activated, and he's threatening to play knight takes on d5. And knight e6, knight c5, knight a4. But it's too late. Knight takes on a3, bishop takes on a3, and knight b5 attacking the bishop. Bishop c1, knight takes on c3, knight e2, and knight b1. And now black pawns will be promoted.
black is going to play a3. If white doesn't take on a3, for example knight d5, then we can apply the same idea. Knight b1 and a3, a2, a1. Thank you for your attention. From this lecture, you can learn how to win a game if you created a protected passed pawn. The only thing you need is to move the game into endgame.